Internet, what's going on? Mighty fine back for this Easter edition, for those of you that observe that, of my weekly analysis. Hey, before we dive into it, check out my Discord. I send this analysis early, plus I send charts out for this analysis for each pair in this analysis. It's a good way to get some extra learning. I even drop session links once in a while to join my preparation session and watch me do my markups and so on and so forth. Might even drop a couple of nuggets in there for free, free knowledge, because who doesn't love that? Check it out. Link is down below this video in the description. If you don't already subscribe, give me a sub, give me a thumbs up so other people can get this resource and improve their trading. So without further ado, I got a little bit of feedback on my Instagram this week, and I asked people if they wanted to see any extra pairs. And interestingly, the most common response was that people wanted to see pairs that might perform well during the Asian session. Now, that's way out of my wheelhouse. I am not an Asian session trader. I don't like Asian session. I find that most of the pairs that I've ever looked at, which are predominantly dollar-based pairs, they consolidate in that Asian session. And so it's not a session that I'm super familiar with. I reached out to a couple of friends and a few other people that I know have traded Asian session, and one of the big suggestions that came up was AUDJPY. So I threw that in the mix here this week. But as per usual, we're going to be covering the US dollar, AU, GU, GJ, EJ. We'll look at gold and then AJ, like I said. So let's dive right into it. So US dollar. Last week I called bullish. Indeed. What do you know? Price did expand bullish. It was remaining bullish. We retested our daily demand almost perfectly right here. We got a little bit of a intra-week, 2-week transition here, and then it just took off. And we're now coming back in to retest this high time frame trend high. So our daily demand lives all the way down here. Interesting demand here as we work down into smaller time frames. Ultimately, what we want to know is, can we break into a new high time frame trend high? Right? I've put some arrows on here like usual, indicating potential directional biases based on these key levels. So if we see a break into a new trend high, then we're expanding the bullish trend. We would need some form of retracement after the break into a new high, and we could look to take that retracement, transition back into a bullish play, and then obviously, sell anything against the dollar. That would represent a bullish expansion. However, this is interesting to me. This was your H4 demand that gave you this last push to the upside, right? And this cracked right below it. Immediately, however, buyers stepped back in and pushed price back up into the current highs. If price were to break below this H4 minor demand right here, a demand that has not created a new trend high, if price were to not go into a new high here, but then instead reverse and break this H4 minor demand, I think it is very sound to sell the dollar below this level. And again, in this instance, for those of you that understand price action in any degree, you're looking for some sort of break, some sort of retest, and then a transition into new lows. That would be the idea there. Now, obviously, that is counter trend or against the overall high time frame trend right now, which is clearly bullish. I would prefer a bullish move. We could see price do a couple of things. One, price could just pull back, honor this level, and then start to range and try and expand again. This would represent new orders potentially coming in the market to try and attack into a new high. Secondly, we could see, a little bit of sideways BS and then an expansion to the upside. If so, you're just looking for continuation trades at that point. If, however, we see this reversal, we see bearish order flow start to come in and that level breaks, we're looking for a retest relative to that break in some fashion on a high time frame. We can look to sell the dollar. And this is going to really help us inform our opinions and perspective for the week to come. Keep that in mind for all of you FX traders. Interesting things to consider. As we move on, we're going to move into AUD USD. Really one of my favorite FX pairs. But as of late, it was kind of weird. It was very divergent. Last week, I thought that we might have some bearish continuation. Not a lot of volume, but we did creep into some new lows down here. I've got a little bit of a note here for you to read. After this daily break of flow, after we came back, retested some supply, and then started to create these new lows, I think the bearish opinion is still very, very valid. I do want you to be considerate, however, of this 73600 to 73850 region here. There's some very interesting liquidity that I've identified off of my time frame correlation analysis using multiple time frames, including the smaller ones, to find certain details that I look for. Keep this in mind. It's a very strong level of liquidity, and if buyers step back in at that point, it could be your high time frame weekly trend leg retest. It really could. In order to take a trade based on that, I would need to see maybe an H1 or an H4 transition, a break of supply, and then a retest, and look to try and get in on the higher time frame order flow, because it could potentially be a swing trade. However, immediately I would say that the bearish bias still holds true. I want to watch this H1 supply here. If we get a break above H1 supply, we're going to retrace relative to this H4 supply here. I would look to potentially sell near this H4 supply into new lows. The daily supply is a little bit muddy, and I really don't think I would look to attack at that level. I would just look to observe and then maybe consider if we were to see like an H1 bearish transition from this daily zone, daily supply, and then H4 zone within it. If we were to see something like, for example, price come up, break that H1 supply level, and then come up into here and start to transition, I might look to take one of the order flow situations in there to the downside, but I would need that confirmation, that break of flow, and then show us that sellers are holding that level and we intend to create new lows here. It'll still give you a great play. I would just want a little bit more confirmation from that daily supply level there. If we got the retest of the H4 supply and an immediate, bearish transition, I would love to take these trades as well. Breaks into fresh new lows just mean that we have to wait for a retracement relative to the current trend leg. Keep that in mind. And again, watch out for this liquidity level. It's a strong one. As we work our way back down here, I think the 7,200 region starts to get really interesting as well. GBP USD, pretty underwhelming here this week, but one thing that I do want you to consider is how accurate you can get with price action. I mean, you can't tell me that this is a coincidence. Price comes right into my target zone that I highlighted for my community and private members last week. It just touches it, and then immediately we see this enormous explosion to the upside, right? How do you do it? Well, they know how. Anywho, bearish bias overall into last week worked out pretty well for the first couple of days. We tapped into that level that I highlighted for them as a break or bounce situation. Immediately tapped right into there. We got an intraday transition. This is an underwhelming pair for me right now. I don't like it. In order to really want to sell this thing, I need to see a break into and below the 129,500-ish region down here, this double arrow here. I really wouldn't look to take this buy at all unless I saw a break of supply. If I were to see a intra-week transition, which would take a while, if I were to see something like this, look to take that up into this zone here. I think that's a good idea. Anything above this, we expand significantly towards these weekly supply regions up top. So do keep that in mind. But overall, bearish bias, so long as the dollar continues to go to the upside. Again, that dollar analysis really helps us inform on these dollar-backed pairs. Not high on my list right now for the week, but I will keep an eye on it because it's one of my main ones. We're going to move on to GJ. This is one that does move well in the Asian session. And if you ever want to find that, for any of you that might be interested in that, if you go and search my name on TradingView, you'll see something called Asia to London. What this little indicator does is it highlights time bands. I have them for a lot of different things, including my equities trading. But what you can do is you can turn this on. You can say, okay, from the start of blue, which is the Asian session, into pink, which is London session, did this have consistently decent moves? And it does. It really does. We see this little bit of a start here, push to the upside to start the week. Nothing much on that Monday or into Tuesday. A little bit here. Not so much here, right? This is what I did to figure out that AJ does move pretty well in Asian session. GJ, being a yen-backed pair, it would make sense that it does move decently as well. So keep that in mind. Anyways, very bullish, just like we called for last week. Very, very bullish. We saw this nice trend expansion. We have a new current trend leg here. I think this is important to keep in mind. And a fresh high has been printed. You really need some form of retracement relative to this leg to consider anything. We have a very bearish bias. It's an easy read overall. This right here is a great place to go back and back test. I called this level as a strong breaker bounce situation where we were looking for a bullish move and a bullish transition from this area This worked out fucking beautifully. Great area to go back test. Just wanted to highlight that for you that wanted to do your little due diligence and learn something on your own. As we look at the H4 chart, I think that in this flow right here, this H4 demand is very, very important. If it were to break, this would signal that we're getting that retracement. So this is an important breaker bounce here. If we just expand into a new trend high, we got to wait for some sort of intraday transition, some sort of pullback, and we'll look to take a bullish transition after the pullback stops. And finding those levels is up to you. I think that this has a lot of momentum and inertia right now. At some point, they're going to need more orders, but it's hard to say when. So again, this one's kind of low on my list just because we're going to need a high time frame retracement to continue the trend. Your AUDJPY didn't do too much last week. After we broke past that weekly supply level that I've been talking about for a while now, price has just come right back up and is retesting this. We've got an important potential trend expansion, break or bounce situation here at this flow high that I have indicated. More interestingly, I think, is the 4-hour chart. A couple of levels that I want you to watch, predominantly the 135, 150 region, and then down towards 134, 500. Two strong levels of demand here in the current trend. This is your H4 demand, certainly. Price is now ranged up a bit to end out the week. So, the real question is what's going to happen here. I don't really want to buy in the trend highs. So I would need some sort of pullback into one of these levels to consider a long position. However, if price breaks below the H4 demand here, I'm just going to watch it at the daily demand. Anything below it would change my bias to bearish. So keep that in mind. Overall, again, very bullish, looking for trend expansion. We need some form of retracement in order to take a smart play. And then we can look to continue to ride that thing upwards. Gold, also another one that I was correct on last week. Price moved up and expanded, and then we got this nice little attempt here to crack upwards. Not a whole lot of momentum, not a whole lot of volume here. I wanted to look at the H4 chart because I think that this is an important level. But first, this is the true demand of this entire leg, and I want you to keep that in mind. There's a little bit of a note here for you to read. If you need to pause it, read that. It's an important one. Do keep that in mind if this were to pull back against the current trend leg that we're going to look at now on the H4. So importantly, I would watch this 1944 region here. This is a very strong level of demand if the H4 demand is broken. As you can see right here, H4 demand that gave us that most recent expansion trend was retested almost to the T and then honored. Buyers stepped right back in on Friday. So this is going to be an interesting little attempt at creating new highs. I think that if we push above 1981, we're going to see a bullish expansion up towards these trend highs closer to 2050, at least into the week. I would say that I would really start watching it around 2040, 2035. Now, that's a very big bullish expansion potential. So how would I handle this? I think the smartest way to handle this would be to wait for this break and then look for the immediate retest and continuation. That's idea number one. Idea number two would be a break of this H4 demand and a play back into either this level here or towards this daily demand. However, again, read that note. If this daily demand is retested, just be careful because this level could certainly be tapped into and still maintain the overall bullish trend. So that's number two. I wouldn't really look to sell it. The only way I would look to sell it is if it dumped below 1890. And I think in order for that to happen, we would probably need a dissolution of all geopolitical tension in Eastern Europe. And we would probably need China and Shanghai to figure their shit out with COVID, which I think is highly unlikely, almost impossible. I don't want to say anything's impossible because, well, you've lived through these past couple of years with me too. But with that being said, I think it's highly improbable that those two things would happen. And I think that would be the only catalyst that would drop gold below that level. So fundamentally, very, very bullish. We're just looking for that opportunity. There's a ton of fucking opportunity for expansion to the upside. Do keep that in mind. Last but not least, I want to look at AUDJPY, another pair that is just very bullish. It does move nicely. One thing I wanted to highlight for you. Let's go to the 1 hour chart. Let's turn on that Asia to London thing. And what we can see here is that, yeah, there really are, some pretty significant moves, particularly starting towards this Asian session into the core Asian trading session, which goes from green to this sort of white opaque color. You can see there's quite a few moves here, but most of them are very immediate. Most of them are kind of trading the current trend or trading the current direction of flow. So do keep that in mind. But this is a pair that moves well. Let's look at the high time frame picture here. The last time I looked at this pair was back in February. Where we were talking about this big consolidation range, and I said that if price breaks above this range, we're looking for a test of this level here. And then what did we get? Massive voluminous expansion to the upside. Now, the tough part is this is your whole weekly leg right here, right? After we were in this big consolidation bit, we've had no pullback here. So one thing I would suggest to watch very closely is the intra-week sort of structure. This is a major level, even though it says minor daily demand, it says that because it hasn't created a new high. This is a very important area, and anything below this would mark a potential trend retracement coming in. So my bias would switch to bearish below this level. However, if price just comes back in and retests this like 91 to 50 region here, I may look to, buy it and look for a trend expansion. Again, very, very bullish. We're currently attempting a trend expansion as well. If it cracks above it, great. Look for a retest, look for a bullish transition on the H1 or H4, and then look to ride this thing into new highs. If it breaks below that minor daily demand, as I just said, you might want to change your potential immediate or intra-week bias to sell back towards the 85 region for this pair, AUDJPY. Now, these are just high time frame price action based reads. Other things that I talk about with my community are how to target certain areas that have very high potential for very profitable trades, how to enter in those areas if our system says to enter, and how not to enter if the system says not to enter, how to manage our trades, where to look for potential TPs, how to ride trends, how to scalp, which I do almost every morning. I mean, I trade, very short term on NASDAQ, as well as FX, as well as commodities, so on and so forth. If you're interested in that kind of thing, check out my website. Also in the link below this video, mightyfinefx.com. I'm mightyfine on Instagram. And until next week, be smart, trade safe, and have fun. Mighty Fine out.